There is a particular kind of loneliness that only exists at 2 in the morning, when the rest of the world is breathing slowly and you are sitting cross-legged on a bathroom floor with your phone light turned all the way down, reading about folic acid supplements. I had 17 browser tabs open. I know that because I counted them, twice, before I closed every single one, cleared my search history, deleted the 3 apps I downloaded 3 weeks prior, and sat there in the dark for a long moment listening to the sound of Harry Roman sleeping in the next room. He had no idea. That was the part that kept the air from moving properly in my lungs. Not the secret itself, not the impossibility of the situation, not even the terrifying arithmetic of what I'd been quietly calculating in the margins of my own mind for weeks. Just the simple, staggering fact that the man sleeping 8 feet away from me, separated only by a wall and 4 years of a complicated, electric, exhausting relationship, had absolutely no idea. Harry Roman, 6'2" of controlled intensity, dark eyes that miss nothing, hands that could be unbearably gentle or devastatingly firm, and a jaw that I had, at various points in our time together, wanted to bite and wanted to cry against in equal measure. My alpha, my business partner, the man who had once held me up against a kitchen counter at midnight, while I laughed until I couldn't breathe over something neither of us could remember anymore, and who had, 3 weeks ago, in a moment of vulnerability so brief and uncharacteristic that I'd wondered if I'd dreamed it, pressed his forehead to mine and said very quietly, "Don't leave." I hadn't left. I also hadn't told him, because here was the problem. Here was the shining, specific, impossible problem that I had been carrying around like a stone in my chest since the moment the second app confirmed what the first app had suggested and what my body had been quietly insisting for longer than I was comfortable admitting. Harry Roman did not want children. He had said so, plainly and without apology, in the early weeks of our relationship when we'd been new enough to each other to think that honesty was the same as safety. We'd been lying on the roof of his building, his idea, blankets and bourbon and a sky that felt rented from a better life, and he'd said it the way people say things they've made peace with. Not angry, not sad, just settled. "I don't think I'm built for it," he'd said. "Kids, the whole thing, my father was," he'd stopped, started over. "I don't want to do to someone else what was done to me." I'd said I understood. I did understand. I understood it still, which is why I was sitting on a bathroom floor at 2 in the morning, deleting apps instead of walking 8 feet and telling the truth. My name is Hector Mills. I am 31 years old. I am the co-founder and creative director of a mid-sized design consultancy that Harry and I built from a shared apartment and a dangerous amount of stubbornness. I am, by most external measures, a competent adult who handles difficult conversations with reasonable grace, and I was absolutely, completely, catastrophically terrified. I sat there until the cold of the tile seeped through my sweatpants and into my bones. Then I got up, washed my face, and went back to bed. Harry didn't stir. He slept on his side, one arm stretched across the space I'd vacated. Like even unconscious, he was reaching. I stood in the doorway for too long, looking at the shape of him in the dark. The broad curve of his shoulder, the slow rise and fall of his ribs, the way his hair fell across his forehead in a way he'd hate if he could see it. I made a list, the way I always did when things felt too large. 1. Figure out what you actually want. 2. Figure out if what you want is even possible. 3. Stop looking at him like that. It's not helping. I got back into bed. His arm found me in his sleep, pulling me in against his chest with the unconscious certainty of someone who had done it so many times it had become reflex. He made a low sound, somewhere between a word and a sigh. "Heck," he murmured, not quite awake. "I'm here," I said. "Good." He was asleep again in seconds. I lay there in the dark, his heartbeat steady under my palm, and tried to remember what it had felt like before I was keeping something this large from him. I couldn't. The thing about secrets, which nobody tells you when you're in the middle of keeping one, is that they have a physical weight, not metaphorical, actual bodily weight, a pressure in the chest, a tightness across the shoulders, a way of making every ordinary moment feel slightly offset from reality, like you're watching your own life through glass. I became very good at ordinary in those weeks. I woke up with Harry and made coffee the way he liked it, strong enough to strip paint, 2 sugars that he pretended he didn't take because he had a complicated relationship with sweetness in all its forms. I sat across from him at our kitchen table and talked about client presentations and the Mercer account and whether we needed to hire another motion designer. I laughed at his dry observations and pushed back on his instincts when I thought he was wrong, and let him push back on mine. I was in every visible way exactly who I had always been. Inside, I was doing math constantly. The consultancy's insurance, the spare room we'd been using as a dumping ground for equipment, the article I'd read and immediately tried to unread about alpha-omega pairs and the specific, rare complications that came with omega pregnancies when the alpha didn't know. I wasn't far along, 6 weeks, maybe 7, early enough that the only physical evidence was a fatigue that I blamed on overwork and a sensitivity to certain smells that I managed by avoiding the Thai place we'd always loved and pretending I'd just gone off it. "You've been quiet," Harry said one evening. We were on the couch, the comfortable late evening sprawl that had evolved naturally over years. His legs extended across the cushions, my back against his chest, a documentary neither of us was really watching on the screen. His chin was resting on my head. "Tired," I said. A pause, not a comfortable one. Harry's pauses never were. He thought in them. "You've been tired a lot. The Carver pitch is eating me alive." Another pause. His arm tightened slightly around my waist, not constraining, just present. "You'd tell me," he said, and it wasn't quite a question, if something was wrong. The thing about Harry Roman is that he had spent most of his adult life being lied to by people who should have known better. His father, a business partner before me, someone he'd loved before he loved me, who had left without warning and let him find out the hard way. He didn't ask for reassurance often. When he did, it cost him something. I turned my head just enough to look up at him. His jaw was tight. His eyes were on the television screen, but not seeing it. "Yes," I said, "I would tell you." The lie sat between my teeth, like something sharp. He pressed a kiss to my temple. "Okay." We went back to the documentary. I counted my own heartbeats for a while and tried to calculate how much longer I could hold the line. The answer, as it turned out, was not long at all. It was a Thursday. I know it was a Thursday because we had our standing team meeting Thursday mornings, and I'd left my phone on the kitchen counter when I went to shower. And Harry had been in the kitchen when I came back, and the specific, precisely controlled blankness of his expression told me everything I needed to know before he said a single word. He was holding my phone, screen up. The browser was open, not to the tabs I'd deleted. Those were gone, but to something else. Something I had forgotten about entirely, which was the cruelest kind of oversight. A web search. Not an app. Not something I'd thought to clear. A search I'd run 3 days ago, in a moment of 4 a.m. panic. Can an omega hide a pregnancy from a bonded alpha at 7 weeks? He'd seen it. I knew he had. The way he was holding the phone was the same way he held things when he was trying very hard not to react. Carefully, with a measured deliberateness that was its own form of intensity. The silence in the kitchen was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. "Harry," I started. "How long?" Not a question, 2 words, very flat, the affect stripped out of them in a way that meant he was somewhere deep inside himself, managing something enormous. 7 weeks, I said. "Almost 8, he set the phone down on the counter, very gently. Then he put both hands flat on the surface and looked at the tile, and I watched the muscles in his back move as he breathed. "You are going to hide it," he said. Still flat. Still that terrible, controlled evenness. "I was trying to figure out you were going to hide it from me." His head came up then, and he looked at me across the kitchen, and whatever I'd been bracing for, anger, coldness, the particular remoteness he deployed when hurt, was not what I found. What I found was something that looked, terrifyingly, like devastation. "Harry, you know what I told you in the beginning. You know what I said." He stopped, pressed his mouth together. "And you went 8 weeks without." 7, almost. I said it stupidly, automatically, and then wanted to swallow my own tongue. Something flickered in his expression. Not humor, just the shock of such a profoundly misplaced correction in a moment this serious. "Hector," his voice cracked on my name, just slightly, just once, and I felt it somewhere behind my sternum like a small, clean break. 7 weeks. You kept this from me for 7 weeks. "I was scared," I said. "I am scared. You said, 'Harry, you told me you never wanted this. You told me why. And I've been—'" My voice wasn't cooperating. I pressed on anyway. I've been trying to figure out what I want and what's possible and how to have the conversation without. I didn't want to lose you. I thought if I had more time. More time for what? His hands came off the counter. He crossed the kitchen, and I held very still. And he stopped in front of me, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating off him. Close enough to touch, but not touching. More time to make a decision alone? More time to decide for both of us what was possible? That's exactly what you were doing. His voice was low now. Not cold. Something rawer than cold. I know why you did it. I understand why you were scared. He reached up and put one hand on the side of my face, and I found I was shaking slightly, just a small tremor I hadn't noticed until his warmth stilled it. I told you who I was, what I was afraid of. I told you the most specific, damaged part of my reasoning, years ago, because I trusted you with it, and you took that and used it to decide that I shouldn't get to be part of this. That landed exactly where he meant it to. I'm sorry, I said. And then, because it wasn't enough and I knew it, I'm so sorry. He pressed his forehead to mine. His hand was still on my face. We stood there in the kitchen in the thin morning light, and I could feel his breath against my skin. Unsteady, which almost never happened. Harry Roman, who breathed with the steadiness of someone who had learned to control his own atmosphere as a matter of survival. I don't know what I want, he said. Quiet, honest. The honesty that cost him. I told you I didn't want children. I meant it when I said it. I don't know what I mean now, but I needed, Hector, I needed the chance to find out. With you, not after. I know, I said. I know. I'm sorry. We stayed like that for a while. Not fixed, but present, which, I was learning, sometimes had to be enough. He drives. I know this because I have known him for 4 years and been with him for 3 of them, and whenever something lands on him that he needs to metabolize, he gets in his car and he drives. Not fast, not recklessly, just moving, like the motion is a way of processing that sitting still won't allow. He left that Thursday morning after the kitchen, quietly, without slamming anything, without the performance of anger that would have been easier to navigate. He just said, I need some time, and got his keys, and I stood in the kitchen, listening to the elevator and then to nothing. I sat down on the kitchen floor, not because I was being dramatic, just because my legs made the decision before I did, and the floor seemed like a reasonable place to think. I'd been so certain, in my careful, frightened calculations, that the risk was losing him, that the pregnancy was a grenade that would detonate the thing we'd built, and leave nothing but the specific ruin of something that mattered enormously. I'd been managing that risk like a project, like a pitch, gathering information, controlling variables, delaying the conversation until I had something, some angle, some approach, some version of the truth that would cause the least damage. What I hadn't calculated was this, that the hiding itself was the wound, not the fact, the hiding. I'd spent 7 weeks treating Harry like someone who needed to be managed, like someone whose reaction had to be predicted and preempted and controlled, like he was a force to be navigated rather than a person to be trusted. And Harry Roman, who had been managed and preempted and controlled by every significant person in his life before me, who had learned to keep himself at arm's length from his own emotions, precisely because no one had ever suggested that his reaction was safe to have. Harry Roman had handed me the map of exactly where he was fragile, and I had used it to draw the boundaries of what I was willing to share. That was the thing I needed to sit with, not whether he'd come back. He would come back. I knew him well enough for that. But what I'd done, and why, and what it meant about how I'd been operating in the most important relationship of my life. I sat on the kitchen floor for a long time. Then I got up, made myself eat something, and started building the honest version of the conversation I should have had 7 weeks ago. He came back after dark. I heard his key in the lock and didn't move from the couch, where I'd been sitting for the last hour with my laptop open to a document I hadn't written a single word of. The light in the living room was low. I'd left the kitchen light on, the way he liked when he came home late, the small geography of a shared life. He stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at me. He'd been driving for hours. His hair was slightly less controlled than it had been. He'd taken his jacket off somewhere. He was in the dark Henley I'd always found disarming, for no reason I could adequately explain. The Carver pitch wasn't real, was it? He said. Not accusing, just confirming something he'd been adding up. It's real, I said. I've just been using it as an excuse for being distracted. He crossed the room and sat down on the coffee table in front of me, not beside me on the couch, facing me, close enough that our knees were almost touching, in the posture of someone who meant to actually look at the person they were talking to. "Tell me what you've been thinking," he said. "For 7 weeks. Tell me the whole thing." I told him about the first app, the one I'd downloaded on a Thursday morning 2 months ago, when something had felt off and I'd wanted to rule it out and hadn't been able to. The way I'd sat with the result for 3 days before I could even look at it without my hands shaking. The 17 browser tabs at 2 in the morning. The list I made on the bathroom floor. The specific arithmetic of what I'd been afraid of. I told him what I wanted, which I had in those 7 weeks of quiet calculation, actually managed to figure out, even if I'd told myself I hadn't. That I wanted this, terrifyingly, impractically, completely, I wanted this. And that I'd been so certain he didn't, that I hadn't been able to make myself say so. I told him about the night he'd said "don't leave" and pressed his forehead to mine, and how I'd understood in that moment how catastrophically I'd underestimated what we were to each other, and how I still hadn't found the courage to close the distance. When I was done, the room was quiet for a while. Harry was looking at me with an expression I didn't have a word for. Not quite soft, not quite hard. Something that was both and neither, the expression of a man who was thinking things faster than he could translate them. "When you say you want this," he said carefully, "you mean—" "Yes," I said. "I mean the whole thing. I mean the complicated, terrifying, probably logistically disastrous whole thing. And I know that's not what you said you wanted. And I know your reasons, and I'm not asking you to override them. I stopped. I needed you to know the truth, all of it, what I want and what I've been afraid of and what I shouldn't have said 7 weeks ago." He was quiet for a long time. Outside, the city made its nighttime sounds. Distant traffic, someone's music, the low murmur of the world going on around us. "My father," Harry said finally, "was never present, not really. He was physically there, for stretches, but he was elsewhere. Somewhere inside himself that none of us had access to. And I grew up thinking that was what fathers were, just people who occupied space without filling it." He paused. "I told you that I didn't want to do to someone what was done to me, but I never actually told you what I was afraid of." I waited. "I'm afraid," he said, slowly and precisely, like he was reading it off a page he'd never shown anyone, "that I'm more like him than I know. That I'll be present the way he was present, taking up space without actually being there, and the damage of that." His jaw tightened. "I've watched what it does to people. I didn't want to be the cause of it. Harry, I know it's not a certainty," he said. "I know I'm not him. I'm not confused about that most of the time, but it's the thing I can't entirely reason myself out of." "I know," I said, "because it was true and I should have said it a long time ago. You're the most present person I know. You notice everything. You ask the right questions. You remember what matters. You have never once, in 4 years, occupied space without filling it." He looked at me. "You are nothing like him," I said. "I have had 4 years of evidence. That's what I know." The thing that happened in his face then was small, barely visible, a slight giving way, somewhere behind the eyes. The particular shift of a person who has been holding something very tightly for a very long time and has been offered, very carefully, the possibility of setting it down. "I don't know what I want," he said again. But it sounded different this time, less like a wall and more like a door. "That's okay," I said. "I'm not asking for an answer tonight. I'm just asking you to be in it with me, the not knowing, the figuring it out." I looked at him. Together, the way it should have been from the beginning. He reached out and took my hand from my lap, turned it over, pressed his thumb against the inside of my wrist, where my pulse was, as he sometimes did, a habit I'd never asked about and he'd never explained, and that meant something I understood without needing words. "You should have told me," he said. "I know. The moment you knew, that should have been the first call you made. I know. He stopped. His thumb moved slightly on my wrist. "I'm angry about the 7 weeks. I need you to know that. Not at the situation, at the choice. You're allowed to be. And I'm going to need some time to process the whole thing. The news itself, not just the hiding. I've had 1 afternoon with this and it's still." He exhaled. "It's a lot. I know." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he did something that undid me more than anything else that day, more than the confrontation in the kitchen, more than his absence, more than everything. He shifted from the coffee table to the couch, right beside me, close enough that our sides were pressed together, and he put his arm around me and pulled me in against him and tucked his chin against my head. "We'll figure it out," he said, very quietly. Not a promise of a specific answer, not a resolution, just, "We'll figure it out, together," which was, I understood, exactly what I'd been asking for. I let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for 7 weeks. "Okay," I said. Outside, the city breathed on. Things between Harry and me did not become simple overnight. I want to be honest about that, because the impulse is always to skip forward to the part where everything is resolved, where understanding arrives like sunlight after weather, clean and conclusive. But that's not how it worked. What happened instead was something slower and more honest and harder. The actual texture of two people who care about each other, attempting to navigate something genuinely large. Harry told me, the day after, that he'd called his therapist. He said it in the kitchen while we were making breakfast, matter-of-factly without the defensiveness that once would have accompanied anything that felt like an admission of need. He was, at 34, still learning to treat his own interior life as worth attending to. I'd watched it happen over the years of our relationship, the gradual, hard-won willingness to acknowledge that what he felt mattered. She had time this week, he said, turning eggs in a pan with the focused attention he gave to anything he did with his hands. Thursday afternoon. "Good," I said, and meant it entirely. He nodded once, and that was that. We started having the conversations, the ones I'd been avoiding for 7 weeks, and that he'd been, in his own way, sitting at the threshold of, since the moment he'd read that search history. Not one single enormous confrontation, but many smaller ones. Over meals, and in the car, and once in the elevator on the way back from a client meeting, standing in the stainless steel box of it while the floors ticked by. What did I need medically? What were the options? What was I actually thinking about the future? Not abstractly, not in the 2 a.m. arithmetic, but concretely, practically, in terms of real life and real logistics. He asked good questions. He always asked good questions. It was one of the things about him that had drawn me in from the very beginning, the quality of his attention, the sense that when he asked something, he actually wanted the answer, rather than waiting for the noise to stop so he could speak. And he listened. To everything. Even the parts that were clearly hard to hear, the weeks I'd spent alone with this, the specific fears that had kept me from telling him, the way I'd been treating the relationship as something too fragile to bear the truth. That one he sat with for a while. "You thought I'd leave," he said one evening. We were in bed, lights off, in the dark adjacent intimacy that made things sayable that weren't sayable in daylight. "I thought you might," I admitted. "Or that you'd stay and, I don't know, resent it. Me. Heck, I know. Have I ever, in 3 years, given you a reason to think I'd leave over something like this?" I thought about it honestly. "No. That's the complicated part. You've never given me the reason. I manufactured it from your history. From what you told me about wanting. I took one piece of information about who you were at a specific point in your life, and I used it to predict everything." He was quiet for a beat. "That's what I do," he said, "with you. I take one look, one expression, one silence that lasts a few seconds longer than usual, and I start constructing entire narratives about what you're thinking, what you're feeling, whether you're still—" He stopped. "Here," he said, "in it." I turned over to face him in the dark. He was on his back, one arm behind his head, looking at the ceiling. "Harry, it's a thing I do," he said. "I know I do it. I've been working on it. It's relevant that you do it too, just in a different direction." "We're both idiots," I said. He laughed, a real one, brief and low, that I felt as much as heard. "Both idiots," he agreed. "Separately idioting when we should have been idioting together. That's not a word. It is now." I put my hand on his chest, over his heart. He covered it with his. "I'm here," I said. "Still in it, completely." He turned his head to look at me. "I know. I'm working on believing it consistently." A pause. "The therapy is helping." "Good." She said I have a pattern of preemptive detachment as a protective mechanism. He said it with the slightly careful precision of someone relaying a clinical insight that he's still metabolizing. She said it's adaptive, that it made sense given the context, but that it sometimes means I hold people at arm's length precisely when I most want them close. "That tracks," I said softly. "Does it drive you insane?" "Sometimes," I said, honestly, "but I understand it. And I'd rather have the version of you that's trying to understand it than a version of you that doesn't know it's there." He pressed my hand against his chest a little more firmly. Okay, he said. Good. We lay there for a while. I've been thinking, he said, about the things I said, the reasons I gave, years ago. I stand by them. I mean, the fear is real. I'm not pretending it isn't. But I've been thinking about whether the fear is information, or whether it's an instruction, whether it's telling me something important about what I need to prepare for, or whether it's been operating as a verdict. I didn't say anything. I just listened. My therapist used a phrase. She said, fear is a verdict versus fear as a compass. That fear can tell you where the difficult terrain is without telling you not to cross it. He exhaled slowly. I've been treating mine like a verdict. And now? Now I'm trying to figure out what it looks like as a compass. A long pause. I don't have an answer yet, but I'm actually thinking about it, not just around it, in it. That's all I needed, I said. Is it? Yes, I said. That's exactly all I needed. He was quiet for a moment. Don't underestimate yourself, Hector. You deserve more than someone who's just thinking about it. I know, I said, but I also know you, and I know what it costs you to be inside it instead of around it. So yes, that's what I needed. He didn't answer that with words. He pulled me in against him instead, his arm around my shoulders, and he held on in the careful, deliberate way of someone who has decided to stay present. The first real appointment, not the early one, the tentative is this real, confirm and figure out appointment, but the first actual one, the one that made it architecturally solid in a way that all the browser tabs and deleted apps had never managed, was on a morning in early spring when the light had that particular quality of being recently returned, clean and slightly tentative, like something that hadn't quite remembered how to be warm yet. Harry drove. He hadn't asked if he could. He just picked up his keys when I appeared in the kitchen, jacket on, and said, "Ready?" And I looked at him for a moment and said yes. He drove with one hand on the wheel and one arm extended across the console between us, his hand open on the seat. I put mine in it after about 3 blocks. He closed his fingers around mine without looking away from the road. The clinic was calm. A handful of other people in the waiting room, a woman reading a novel on her phone, a couple murmuring to each other over a shared tablet. Harry sat beside me, with his ankle crossed over his knee, and his posture set to the mode I'd learned to read as managing input, which was what he did when he was absorbing something and didn't want it visible. His thumb moved in a small, rhythmic stroke against my knuckles. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. When my name was called, he stood without hesitation, and I watched the doctor, who'd worked with enough alpha-omega pairs to have the particular practiced ease of someone who had learned not to perform expectations, clock him and relax slightly. Harry had that effect. Not warmth exactly, not in the conventional sense, more like a solidity that made spaces feel structurally sound. He was quiet through most of the appointment. Not absent, I could feel him in the room, in the way I always could, the specific atmospheric pressure of Harry Roman's attention. He listened to everything the doctor said with the focus he brought to important briefings, asked 2 questions, both precise, both the right ones. After the second question, the doctor said with a slight smile, "You've been doing your reading." Harry said, it seemed like the relevant thing to do, without any particular inflection, and I had to look away because the alternative was becoming visibly emotional in a clinical setting, which felt undignified. On the way home, he didn't say anything for a while. When we stopped at a light 3 blocks from our building, he picked up my hand from the console again and looked at it for a moment, like he was reading something in the architecture of it. Heart rate, he said. I looked at him. He was watching the light. The first thing, he said. In there, when she... He stopped, restarted. The sound, I wasn't expecting. Another stop. Harry Roman, who was never short of words when he wanted them, running out of them. I didn't anticipate how concrete it would be. The light changed. He drove. It was real before, he said, pulling into the parking structure. I know it was real. I know, but the sound was... He parked. He turned the engine off. He sat there for a moment with both hands on the wheel, looking at the concrete wall in front of us. I was afraid, he said, very quietly, that I would sit in that room and feel nothing, or feel the wrong things, or feel a door closing instead of opening. He turned to look at me. That's what I've been afraid of, underneath everything else, that I'd find out I was actually incapable of it. Harry. But that's not what happened. He searched for the word. What did happen? He looked at me for a long moment, and the expression on his face was something I had never seen there before. Not in all the intimate architecture of everything we'd been to each other. stripped of its usual management, open in a way that was almost alarming, from someone whose openness came so carefully and cost so much. I wanted to be the person in that room, he said. With you. I wanted it. I wasn't performing wanting it. I wasn't being what I thought I should be. I actually wanted to be there. You were, I said. I know. That's the thing. I actually was. He put a hand on my face, the same gesture from the kitchen, weeks ago, his palm against my jaw. I don't have all the answers yet. I'm still in the middle of figuring out what I'm capable of and what I'm afraid of and what the difference is, but I know that I wanted to be in that room, and that feels like something that matters. It matters enormously, I said. He nodded slowly. His thumb moved along my cheekbone. I'm going to need you to be patient with me, he said, while I figure the rest of it out. I know. And I need you to promise me something. No more 7 weeks, he said. No more deciding for both of us what I can handle. Whatever comes, whatever is hard, whatever is scary, whatever you're calculating at 2 in the morning, you bring it to me. We figure it out in the same room. I promise, I said. He held my gaze for a moment, checking it for truth, as he always did. Then he let out a slow breath and pulled me forward and pressed a kiss to my forehead, long and deliberate, the kind that meant something specific and private. Okay, he said against my hair. Okay. I found it by accident. 3 weeks later, on a Saturday morning, looking for the car registration he'd said he'd left on the kitchen counter, and which had migrated, as things in our apartment did, to an uncertain elsewhere. I checked the counter, checked the stack of mail, checked the little dish by the door that collected everything neither of us dealt with immediately. What I found, folded between a utility bill and a hardware store receipt, was a piece of paper that was clearly not the registration. Harry's handwriting, small and precise, forward-leaning in the way of someone who learned to write quickly and never unlearned it. A list, as it happened. I stood there in the morning light, aware that I was reading something not meant for me, unable to stop. Things I know. I am not my father. Therapist note. Say it out loud, regularly. Working on it. I have built things that lasted. I know how to stay. I am good at paying attention. That has to count for something. I know how to be present. I choose to be absent sometimes, for self-protection. That's a choice. Choices can change. Hector doesn't need me to be perfect. Evidence 3 years. He knows exactly what I am, and he's still here. Things I'm afraid of. That the capacity for this isn't in me. That I'll do the thing my father did. Occupy the space without filling it. That I'll get it wrong in a way that can't be fixed. Things I'm working on believing. Fear as a compass, not a verdict. That wanting to be there is not the same as being good at it, but it might be where good at it starts. That the person I am with Hector is not a performance. It's me, the actual me, and that the actual me, the version that is present and paying attention and choosing to stay, might be enough. I folded the paper back exactly as I'd found it, put it back between the utility bill and the hardware store receipt. I stood in the kitchen for a moment, with my hand flat on the counter. Then I went back to the bedroom, where Harry was still asleep, one arm stretched across my vacated side of the bed, with the unconscious reaching that I'd been watching for 3 years and had never once taken for granted. The morning light came through the gap in the curtains in a long diagonal stripe across the foot of the bed. Harry Roman, who wrote lists on pieces of paper and hid them between bills and receipts, who went to therapy and relayed the insights carefully in the dark, as though testing whether they could bear weight, who held my hand in waiting rooms and asked the right questions and drove for hours when he needed to think and always came back, who was terrified of becoming the thing he'd grown up with, and who was, in the working of that terror, becoming something entirely different. I went back to bed. I didn't wake him. I just settled in next to him, and his arm found me the way it always did, and he made that low sound, the word-adjacent one, and I lay there in the morning light and let it be exactly what it was. Enough. More than enough. The actual thing. It was an evening in spring, the real spring this time, the one that had made up its mind. The kind of evening that comes through the windows as something warm and slightly gold. We'd had dinner and cleaned up and ended up on the couch in the familiar tangle of our combined gravitational fields. Not quite watching something on the television. The comfortable half-attention of people who have learned to exist in the same space without requiring anything specific from each other. Harry was reading. Actual reading. A book, which he did on weekend evenings when the week released him. His feet up and his head against my shoulder and the book propped on his chest. I was sketching vaguely in a notebook, the not-quite-work kind of sketching I did to keep my hands busy, when my mind was elsewhere. He spoke without looking up from his page. I've been thinking about the room. I finished the line I was drawing. The spare room? The dumping ground. Yes. A pause. He turned a page. I think we should empty it. We've been saying that for 2 years. We should actually do it this time. Another page. I looked at some things online. There are apparently an unreasonable number of options for the furniture situation. The number of choices involved is frankly aggressive. Something warm moved through my chest. Harry. The window in there gets good morning light. He turned another page, still not looking at me, with the deliberate nonchalance of someone making a very significant move and trying not to telegraph the weight of it. I noticed that when I was in there moving some of the equipment boxes last week. You moved equipment boxes? Made a start. There's a lot of it. A pause. We probably need a storage unit for the overflow. It's logistically involved. I put my notebook down. Harry. Look at me. He turned his head, his chin still on my shoulder, and looked at me sideways, in the way that made him look younger than he was, less controlled, more himself. Are you, I said, telling me you want to build the room? He held my gaze for a moment. I'm telling you, he said carefully, that I've done a significant amount of research in the last several weeks about what I'm capable of, about what I'm afraid of, and whether the fear is instruction or information, about what I actually want versus what I've told myself I want because I was afraid of the alternative. He paused. And I'm telling you that the window in the spare room gets good morning light. I don't have a perfect answer, he said. I'm not there yet. I'm probably not going to be there, perfectly, cleanly, for a while. But I know that I want to empty that room. He held my gaze, steady and deliberate and open in the way that cost him and that he offered anyway. I know that I want to be the person in that room, in the future, the way I wanted to be the person in the clinic. Actually, not performing it. I put my hand on his face. He let me. I know that every piece of evidence I have, he said, a little quieter, suggests that I am not the thing I'm afraid of being. I'm working on believing the evidence. A pause. I'm getting better at it. You are, I said, and I know. He stopped. His jaw shifted slightly under my palm. I know that whatever I'm afraid of, the thing I'm more afraid of, is not being there. For you. He stopped again. Say it, I said, softly. He looked at me. Something settled in his face, the specific settling of a decision made and landed on, the kind that doesn't waver. For our kid, he said. The room was very quiet. There it is, I said, very softly. There it is, he agreed. I kissed him. He kissed me back, with both hands on my face and the book sliding off his chest entirely unnoticed. And outside the spring evening continued being warm and gold through the window, and in the apartment everything was exactly as it had always been, and completely different all at once. It took most of the day. There was, as Harry had noted, a great deal of equipment, and it required 2 trips to the storage unit he'd already rented. He'd done that, quietly, the week before, handled the logistics without ceremony, just noted it over coffee one morning, as though he were reporting on a client's filing status. By evening the room was empty, just walls and floor, and the window that got good morning light. We stood in the doorway together looking at it. It needs paint, Harry said. Yes. And furniture. The options are, as I mentioned, aggressive. We'll figure it out. He glanced at me. Together. Together, I said. He put his arm around my shoulders, and we stood there in the empty room in the early evening light, and I thought about lists, about the ones I'd made on bathroom floors, and the ones I'd found folded between utility bills, and the invisible ones we'd both been keeping all our lives. All the things we were afraid of and working on, and slowly, imperfectly, trying to let be information instead of verdict. I thought about 7 weeks of silence and what it had cost, and about the kitchen and the phone and the way he'd said my name when he was trying to hold very still around something that hurt. I thought about him in the clinic, his hand over mine on the console, the sound he hadn't anticipated, the door opening instead of closing. I thought about fear as a compass, not a verdict, written in his small forward-leaning handwriting on a piece of paper he hadn't known I'd read. Hey, he said. Hey, whatever you're computing in there. He pressed a brief kiss to my temple. You can say it. I stopped. I was making a list. Of course you were, the dry warmth in his voice. What's on it? I thought about it. Things I know, I said. He waited. I know you're going to be extraordinary at this, I said. Not because you're not afraid of it, because you are, and you're doing it anyway. That's the only version of extraordinary that actually holds. He was quiet for a moment. Anything else? I know I should have told you sooner, I said, and I know why I didn't, and I know what that cost, and I know that I'm not going to do it again. The deciding alone, the managing in advance, the treating you like someone to be navigated. I'm done with that. Noted, he said. And I know that this room is going to have paint on it by next month, I said, because you've already researched paint. A beat. I haven't. Harry. A pause. There's a premium low VOC line that's specifically formulated for. It's responsible research, Hector, given the circumstances. I love you, I said. He went still for just a moment, the way he sometimes did with the direct, unframed version of it. Then he turned and looked at me, and his face was doing the thing it did, rarely and quietly, and only when something had reached him all the way in. He said, I'm going to be terrified and probably occasionally impossible, and I'm going to need you to hold the line when my instincts tell me to step back. He held my gaze, but I'm here. I'm in it. I know, I said, and I'm not going anywhere. I know that too. He pulled me in against his side, turned back to look at the empty room, and we stood there together in the threshold of something new. Not finished, not uncomplicated, not arrived, but real and deliberate, and held between us like something we'd built with our hands. Outside, the evening was ending. Somewhere in the building, someone's child was laughing. A high, bright sound that came through the walls without asking permission, the way sound does, the way life does. Harry's arm tightened slightly around my shoulders. Good light, he said, looking at the window. The best, I said. And that was true and enough, and we stayed there in it together until the light changed, and then we went and figured out dinner and the rest of it. The ordinary, daily, ongoing rest of it, side by side. There's a particular kind of fullness that only exists in the early morning, when the light is just starting, and the world is still mostly quiet, and you are sitting in a room that used to be a dumping ground, in a chair that took 3 weeks to agree on, watching someone you love sleep. Harry does not know I do this. He sleeps the way he does everything, completely, with a focused commitment to the task at hand. He'll wake in an hour and be immediately, fully present. No transitional period, no blinking adjustment, just Harry, awake, already thinking. But in this hour, before that, I sit in the chair by the window, and I let myself have the full, uncalculated weight of everything. The room came together over 2 months. The paint Harry had already researched, warm and considered and exactly right, which I hadn't told him because his quiet satisfaction in having chosen it was something I wanted him to have. The furniture arrived in stages, assembled on weekends, Harry with instructions he'd memorized rather than read, assembling with the precise focus he brought to anything tactile. He'd been good at it, of course he had. He's good at most things he decides to do, and he had decided, fully, to do this. There are still hard days, I want to be honest about that. Days when the fear comes back for him. The old fear, the inherited one. The what if I can't do this fear that has been with him since long before I was in his life. Days when I watch him go quiet and careful and slightly unreachable, and I have to trust that he knows the way back, which he does. Days when I wish I'd said something 7 weeks earlier, and then 8 weeks earlier, and then at the beginning of the whole thing, when we were new and terrifying to each other, and honesty felt like standing on the edge of something we hadn't yet agreed to fall from. But I sit in this chair, in the early light, and I think about all the things I know. I know that the search history was the best thing that happened to us. I know that sounds paradoxical, and maybe it is, but here is the truth of it. I had built in 7 weeks of silence a very precise and private architecture of what I thought was possible. I'd measured Harry Roman by the worst thing he'd ever told me about himself, and concluded that my fear was his future. I'd been so busy protecting us both from a conversation that I'd stopped trusting us with each other. The search history broke that open, ungracefully, without ceremony, in the middle of a kitchen on a Thursday morning, but it broke it open. And Harry, who had every right to be entirely undone by it, had instead chosen to be in it. To drive for hours and come back and say, tell me the whole thing. To go to therapy and build a list and hide it between utility bills and mean it. Not as performance, not as what he thought he should feel, but as the actual thing, the real working of his real interior. He was, as I had told him, the most present person I knew. He was, as I had told him, nothing like the fear. I sit in this chair and I look at him, and the light comes through the window the way he said it would. Good light, morning light, the kind that makes ordinary things look like they matter. And I make a new list, the way I do, but this one isn't made at 2 a.m. on a bathroom floor. Things I know, that the truth, even when it's terrifying, is less expensive than the alternative. That Harry Roman writes lists on folded paper and hides them in the kitchen and means every word. That fear is a compass and not a verdict is something you have to learn and relearn and keep choosing, and that he is choosing it. That I should have trusted him earlier, that I won't make that mistake again. That the person sleeping 8 feet away from me, separated now only by a wall and 4 years of a complicated, electric, exhausting, extraordinary relationship, that person is exactly who he has always been, and who he has always been is more than I calculated for, and that whatever comes, the hard days and the terrifying logistics and the imperfect navigation of two people who both make lists and both get afraid and both sometimes choose the wrong kind of silence, whatever comes, we will figure it out in the same room, together. That is what I know. The light shifts. Somewhere in the building, a day is starting. Harry will be awake in a few minutes, fully and immediately, and he'll find me in the chair and give me the look he gives when he's catching me doing something I didn't think he'd notice, which is a look that contains, if you know how to read it, something that functions in him the way warmth functions in everyone else. I'll say, I was just sitting. He'll say, thinking or computing, and I'll say a bit of both. And he'll come and sit on the arm of the chair and put his arm around me, and we'll look out the window together at the morning light, which is, as he noted once and I have never forgotten, exactly the right kind. Good light. The best. If you made it to the end, you're my kind of person. Leave a subscribe. Comment down your favorite part of the story. And if you want early access to videos, exclusive content, or just want to support the channel, hit that join button right below the video. Even one member genuinely means the world to me.